Ice Bear wants justice.
Far and away the least change of the three. All that really happened is that the polar bear stretched his back leg. Technically that does make the track longer, but I don't know, it doesn't feel longer than at least the prior iteration. High Speed Ring has 3 different versions now. Yes, there were actually 2 distinct versions prior to GT7. Gran Turismo 1 and 2 differs from the ones in 4 and 6 in that it's shorter, clocking in at 3.1 kilometers compared to 4. The pit lane is consistently at the top of the neck rather than the bottom sometimes. It takes place in a forest rather than what appears to be a riverside. But most impactfully, the S-bends were banked, making all corners there actual high speed. It's my favorite version for that reason. Also, it's the first time I got to be amused by an unstoppable force threatening the camera on replays. The other ones are still great though. There's very little to complain about GT7's version, apart from showcasing standard cars in the PS5 game. In fact, I think I might slightly prefer this version over GT4-6 since it emphasizes taking the outer ring for faster lap times. I say good stuff.
Find the computer room!
Total opposite from the previous track. Deep Forest is the most different track compared to before, and I hate to say it, but for me at least it's mostly sour. Now overall, the changes made to the layout of the track, I don't mind for the most part. This section with the swerving left to right is now more pronounced, and I think that keeps it fresh. It's actually similar to my experience with Tourist Trophy. Pretty interesting. After this long straight, we are treated to this hairpin. Some people don't like this change because it takes away the high speed flow of the circuit, and yeah, it's kind of a bummer, but I can see why they wanted to change this up. Adding different speeds of corners makes racing more balanced, so low speed corner machines can keep up with high speed ones. I do wish it was better balanced for controllers though. It's now one of the slowest hairpins in the game and you can really feel it, especially on pads. The thing I like most about this change, however, is that it makes the final corner much more bearable. I don't like this corner in prior games. It feels like it's much easier to overshoot and crash into the wall on the right. Because the angle is now more obtuse, that's no longer an issue in GT7. It doesn't bring new problem for twitchier cars, but I prefer to spin out on the inside rather than the outside. Deep Forest on the whole has been a mixed bag for me throughout the series. I loved it back in GT1-3, but ever since then, it always felt like an alternate Trial Mountain. In the early days, Deep Forest was set at sunset or dawn, and with Trial Mountain being set in cloudy conditions. That was enough to make a distinct impact between the two, as otherwise, they're pretty similar aesthetically, taking place in the forest with cliffside, a couple long straights, and some smooth corners. Starting with GT3, the sunset was taken away, at least for forwards. I still loved it back then because it was one of the shortest common tracks in the game, and we still had sunset in reverse. It's when Gran Turismo 4 started where my love for Deep Forest started to wane. The aesthetics began to blend more not just with Trial Mountain, but other tracks as well such as El Capitan or some variations of Capering. Sadly, despite attempts to make things more fresh and the additions of changeable time conditions, Deep Forest lost even more things that make it memorable in the past for GT7. The most notable for me, it doesn't feel like a deep forest anymore. Remember when trees overhanged the track? Yeah, that just doesn't happen anymore. It feels like there's barely any trees present. The hairpin change may make the track more balanced, theoretically, but it makes the track feel like a third of it is just grassy plains. That's the last thing it wants in a deep forest. The other big disappointment is the only other layout change I didn't mention. This double left corner. That was my favorite part of the original track. I love double left or right-handers. It just looks so cool, diving into a corner, reaching to the outside, still turning the same direction, and seeing what position the car is on the second corner. Deep Forest has one of the most satisfying takes on this formula, as it starts with you descending and ends with beginning the long straight next to a cliffside. Now, somehow it's the new worst part of the circuit for me. You now have to always brake on the second corner, which makes the entrance to the straight less exhilarating. But worse still, for me at least, it's more flow ruining than the hairpin. because what comes beforehand are a bunch of swerving corners which are a challenge to get past, making overtaking a pain in the butt, and then comes a small straight giving me a small chance to overtake, only to have to wait just a little after the following corner and midway through the straight to get a chance. I don't even understand why they did this in the first place. There's nothing wrong with the original. In fact, it was more interesting. If you love this iteration, more power to you, but I just find it's okay, and a far cry from prior Gran Turismo games, especially when it was set with a low sun.
Gary!
Trial Mountain is my favorite of the three original and one of my top 5 favorite Gran Turismo circuits, so GT7's version has a lot to live up to. I will say, it was such a big pop-off moment when the first trailer back in 2020 showed that the track was indeed returning.
Try Martin! I saw Try Martin!
It's kind of funny I have a lot of love for this track since it's currently the second most used track in Gran Turismo's career events throughout the franchise, behind Laguna Seca. But unlike some overused circuits, namely Tsukuba, I think it's warranted. Trial Mountain is a perfect blend of fun to tackle corners, memorable set pieces, and easy to learn but hard to master mentality, while being the right length. I'm happy to say that, at least for me, Gran Turismo 7's version delivers on the same feeling. It feels like Trial Mountain, only longer and with gorgeous graphics. I love the longer straights. One of the few nitpicks I have with the old circuit is you don't get as much top speed opportunities when compared to the other Gran Turismo 1 circuits. Not a big deal, but I like that this version addresses the issue, and traveling past the trees on the lower straights feels exhilarating. Some sections are more forgiving, such as this rocky section, which previously was kinda scary with the exposed rock on the left. The final corner is easily the biggest change. And some people might not like that, since it created this extremely fun risk-reward shortcut with the bumpy cliff and fast speed. But I think this was a necessary change in modern Gran Turismo's environment. You can't go off-road for 2 seconds before being teleported back to the road, and tumbling over isn't as funny now that, once again, the car resets if you crash. I appreciate changing the direction for an older audience, even if I prefer the more laid-back and casual approach of the older games. No, the actual change that bothers me is the start. In older games, this swooping left-right-left combo can sometimes be done at full speed with some cars, and it was always satisfying, especially with the elevation change. That's not really possible here, thanks to the closed-in walls, which appears to be a common thing in these reimaginings. Which is strange since real-world circuits and even some GT Sport originals don't have these. But this is the most notable. It's not a bad section, but it's still a downgrade regardless. So that's my thoughts on each circuit. I'm glad that every one of these has returned and reinvented in some way to fit modern time, after GT Sport didn't even bother bringing any back. That was my biggest problem with that game, and I'm glad GT7 is at least attempting to fix that issue. I don't think 3 is going to be enough though, and 2022's updates were pretty lackluster in terms of track additions. Only 4 of 9 months received a track, and only 2 of them were brand new, and both of them are real-world American circuits. Here's hoping Grand Valley or Red Rock Valley return before this March. Until then, see ya!